Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And I just want to start out by thanking all of our listeners and viewers for their loyalty, not just to this series, but over the years. Apologies that it's been a couple of days now since our last episode. Unfortunately, just work and real life and upcoming travel for work have thrown me for a bit of a loop in terms of having the time necessary to keep this series moving forward at the pace that I have been over the last couple of months. But we're going to do a very short episode today, and just a heads up that over the next week or so, from around the 20th of June through the middle of next week, probably going to be somewhat sporadic in terms of our episodes. As I mentioned, just a few things going on. Nothing bad, but just real life getting a bit in the way of this virtual life. And in this virtual life, we've been very successful, winning the last World Series that just finished a few weeks ago with our Oakland A's over the Los Angeles Dodgers. And as we've gotten ready for this season over the past few weeks, made a few trades, signed several players who were eligible for salary arbitration. And now free agency has begun. But before we get into that, I want to follow up on a good point that the notorious KEV has brought up in response to our difficulty moving fan interest, even when we sign players and even when we are extremely successful on the field, as we just were this past season. We've definitely struggled, and you can see our fan interest is standing at a 49, and I've had a couple hypotheses. One is that the fan interest metric is just broken. The second is that this minimal fan loyalty that we were downgraded to a couple seasons ago somehow has a significant factor on perhaps how high fan interest can ultimately grow, and perhaps also just on the magnitude of the positives for any individual move that we happen to make. And it seems like the Notorious agrees with that hypothesis, and I think it makes sense. I don't have a lot of experience, fortunately, dealing with this minimal fan loyalty. I am assuming that success on the field and success getting more fans into the games and consistent solid performance by our players, not just winning this random World Series in 2029, but hopefully becoming a perennial winning team that is usually in the mix for the playoffs and often actually in the playoffs, will help rebuild the damage that has been done. But it could be a situation where it's going to take a few more years to get there, and we will just keep plugging away. Unfortunately, on the theme of plugging away at fan interest, I'll start off this episode letting you know a mistake that I have made, and we did just make a trade for Willy Adames, who is a guy that we were hoping would be available on the free agent market. The Dodgers re-signed him. He wasn't particularly expensive. We had to give veteran players and a couple of middling prospects to get him, and the reason we had to give so many people was we wanted the Dodgers to ultimately keep a really good chunk of his contract this year, 70%, given that we are clearly going to continue to be constrained in terms of our budget after our budget was actually cut following a World Series championship this past year. So it's unlikely that we will be exercising the team option on Adames for 2031. But there were a couple reasons we talked about earlier that we wanted to bring him on board. One was his captain personality. We did trade away one of our longtime captain personalities in Brian Buelvas, and we also let another one of our longtime captain personalities in Mitch Spence move on as a free agent this offseason. So bringing in a captain is something what we really wanted to do. And we also wanted to bring in a player who was extremely popular to hopefully juice the fan interest. But as you've seen here with this 49, which is where we were at the end of the last episode, bringing Adames on board unfortunately did not do that. So you ask, well, you kind of did what you intended to do and you ended up bringing on Adames. What's the big mistake? What's the big problem? Not a huge mistake and a huge problem, but still a mistake. I hadn't actually checked, and for some reason, his popularity, which was extremely popular the last time I looked at him, just a couple weeks ago in game time, had apparently cratered all of a sudden. So I don't know if I still would have made the trade with the Dodgers, knowing that Adames was now completely unlikely to give us a boost to fan interest. Whereas before we thought that even with the potential limitations associated with fan loyalty, we still might get a boost. So carelessness on my part. Still happy to have him on board. Like the glove, like the versatility. Only really intending to play him against left-handed pitching where we think he can still be an effective bat. So glad to have him on board. But again, if I hadn't been so careless and distracted and noticed that his popularity has just kind of cratered over the last couple of weeks for some weird reason, might not have ended up making that trade. Again, we didn't give up anyone who was in our long-term plans. A bunch of veterans and a couple of prospects. And as I said, most of the guys we put in were just to kind of game the system a little bit as far as getting them to retain his money. But given that we still are going to have the lowest budget and the lowest payroll in baseball, and given that I feel like Mr. Fisher has treated us unfairly in these areas, if I have to desperately try to get teams to retain a little bit extra of a contract, I'm not going to hold that against myself. So the big question now is what else we do in free agency. And I am still going to keep an eye on a guy that we have talked about previously. But I'm not going to make him an offer today, and if he ends up going somewhere else, I'm willing to deal with that and accept that, because I think there's a lot of guys who can do what he would do, and that player would be a reunion with Tyler Stevenson, another right-hand hitter with a captain personality who we think could help our lineup against left-handed pitching, which is what our weakness was last year. Although we don't really need a catcher, Stevenson is also capable of playing the corner outfield or DH for us if we need to from time to time. So I think there could be a role for him on the team. He's still looking for $3 million right now. And I do think that although Stevenson is probably my favorite of the guys that we can afford, who have some good personality traits or have some popularity and can actually hit left-handed pitching a bit, given that we don't have a ton of money to play with and we're likely going to be needing to put some additional funds aside for the draft next year once Nick Lodolo and Kyle Bradish are signed. after he made qualifying offers to both of those players that weren't accepted. So we're going to be very cautious with the money. If Stevenson is lingering on the market in a few months and willing to sign for maybe $2 million, I think we'd happily bring him on board. There's some probability that one of the bigger guns available this offseason comes down in price enough for us to bring him on board, which would also be great. You can see there are a couple veterans looking for only minor league contracts, so we made an offer to Ke'Bryan Hayes as well as Joe Rock. Quite honestly, Joe Rock, even if we sign him to a minor league contract, a left-handed reliever is something that we are definitely in need of right now, so Rock would certainly be competing for a potential roster spot, even if he does sign that minor league contract. But on that note of looking for a left-handed pitcher, there are a number on the market. Probably the one that we are most interested in right now is Andrew Nardi, a guy that we've looked at and kicked the tires on in the trade market at times over the last couple of years. Think he could be really effective against lefties for us. The issue is he's looking for $8.5 million. Would love to bring him on board, but think at that number it's going to be pretty hard for us. So another part of the reason of holding off on Stevenson, at least for the time being, is hoping that not only his price comes down, but also that the price on some of these left-handed relievers come down also over the next couple of months, and perhaps we can do some shopping in the discount bin of the free agent market as this offseason moves forward. And we just got a trade proposal from Cincinnati that initially had me really excited. We've been doing offline player searches constantly throughout this playthrough, and we do them constantly throughout every playthrough I do, just trying to find guys who could help. And a guy who always kinds of shows up on those screens is the first baseman, Sal Stewart of the Cincinnati Reds organization, coming off a year where he hit .286, 33 doubles, 25 homers, 17 steals, 133 WRC plus. A very good right-handed bat. Has put up a 121 WRC plus over the course of 4+ major league seasons. Hasn't even turned 26 years old yet. And they offered him to us straight up for a player who's older, 28-year-old Tyler Soderstrom. Now, admittedly, Soderstrom is coming off of a career year when he hit .323 to lead the league. Led the league with a 166 WRC plus. First-time All-Star, first-time Silver Slugger, and obviously won the World Series with us. And he's fragile physically. So there was a part of me that was really excited to get a guy who's younger, arguably better, certainly healthier. The issue, and it didn't take me long to figure this out, and I'm sure some of you know where I'm going, is that we very early in this playthrough signed Tyler Soderstrom to an incredible contract that still has 3 years left, followed by 2 team options. So we potentially control him up through his early to mid-30s at very good numbers, whereas Sal Stewart is making $7.7 million this year, and he's been signed to an extension where he's going to be making $12.5 and then $17.5 million the years after that. So although Stewart is a more complete player than Soderstrom and is clearly younger and healthier than Soderstrom, that contract that we have Soderstrom under, particularly for the Oakland A's, is such an asset to me that as much as I'd love to add a guy like Sal Stewart into our organization, Soderstrom's not the way to get it. And I'm assuming if I look at the options to actually trade for Mr. Stewart. There aren't going to be a lot of them that are realistic because there haven't been the many times I've looked at him over these years. Yeah, you can see only Colt Keith or Tyler Soderstrom will get us Sal Stewart straight up. And although those guys are a little younger than Stewart, even in the case of Colt Keith, we've got Detroit retaining a little over a third of his contract for the next few years, and he's going to be getting expensive for us. So I don't think I do either of those trades, and we'll see if maybe there's something I can piece together for Stewart. But again, this is a guy that I've been looking at pretty consistently over the years and just never been able to find something that made sense from an A's perspective, and particularly now that he's signed to a medium-term contract at medium to high kind of money. Probably unrealistic to try to bring him on board with the fact that we've got a number of holes to fill and barely $8 million to fill them. And again, that includes a scouting and development that are lower than a year ago and a draft budget that is much lower than a year ago that will likely need to be increased after we get through the beginning of the winter meetings and potentially the guys that we made those qualifying offers to start to get signed. And the calendar's now moved into December. We've got 4 days left on Hideki Arakawa's base running fundamentals program, and even though that's supposed to be a relatively easy program, he's frustrated at this point. You can see we do have 4 that are on track and 1 that is excelling at this point. So in theory, it looks like we've got a good chance of being more successful in development this off-season than we have been over the last couple, but still plenty of time for things to change for the negative. And unfortunately, as expected, Arakawa's program in the development lab was not successful. No improvement for him on his base running fundamentals. Thought that he's got the high work ethic, although not high adaptability, and he has decent speed, and that's generally a pretty easy program to be successful on. So we thought we might unlock a little bit there for him, but unfortunately not to be the case here in the early stages of the 2029 to 2030 development lab. And with a new spot in the lab opened up and Jackson Ferris recovered from the injury that cost him the potential to be the starting pitcher in Game 6 of our World Series where we clinched the title, we are going to put him on a program to improve his control. Ferris had a pretty good first year for us, 12-6 record, 3.84 ERA, not quite 26 years old. His ARB number for next year is in the neighborhood of 6 million-ish right now. Certainly would not be shocked to see that climb higher. He's fragile physically, even though he's only 25 years old. So strength and conditioning was certainly a program that we thought about with him. But we're going to be a little less risky, and we're going to try to improve his control. Seems like there's clearly an opportunity there, and that is a program that's a little bit easier. We've still got 3 to 4 months to try to get him on a full-time program, and would rather increase our likelihood of success. So we're going to get Ferris going on an improved control program here, and likely we'll find out late in spring training how that goes. And the fans are upset that Brian Wu has moved on, signed with the Rangers for about $1.2 million. He had a solid year for us last season after we picked him up. shortly before the season got underway. But although we like him as a potential guy who can both start and relieve, just didn't see a big role for him on the team, and we're hoping we can find someone similar-ish in the Rule 5 draft, or perhaps as a minor league free agent in a few months. The fans not happy about it, but fortunately it was such a small impact that we still show a 49 fan interest. But if the fans were upset about Brian Wu leaving, they're probably not going to be real excited when Nick Lodolo signs his contract away from us, and when Kyle Bradish likely does the same. And we've simmed ahead a bit more, not really too much going on, haven't made any free agent offers. Andrew Nardi still out there, supposedly looking for a little bit less now at $8 million a year. Actually 2 years at $7.8 million, still more than we are willing to pay at this point. And batter-wise, Tyler Stevenson still on the market. The quoted price has already come down to $2.4 million. Says he would do about 2.3. You can see we did make him a crappy offer a few weeks ago just to get the conversation going. The price is getting to the point on Stevenson where he's getting interesting to me, but again, I think there's a lot of options for similar-ish types of players, so I'm not going to go crazy. And it's the Rule 5 draft today. You never know. Would love to find a left-handed reliever, but if there is a right-handed hitter who we think can be a productive offensive player against left-handed pitching, that might be something we look to do in the Rule 5 as well. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like there's any particularly compelling position players available in the Rule 5, but there are a couple of pitchers that we may look to add. First round, we're going to go with Jose Hernandez, lefty in the Guardians organization. Above average stuff, average-ish movement, although he does tend to give up some homers and he also walks some batters. But an excellent fastball, a really good slider, a nice changeup. Throws in the mid to high 90s, and a left-hander who's pretty good stuff against left-handed batters. So as a lefty specialist, if we're not able to find someone better in free agency or trade over the coming months, I think having Hernandez in camp at least gives us another option to look at. And here in the second round, another guy we're going to bring on is another left-handed pitcher, Brandon Iser. Stuff not as good, but his control a little bit better. Does not throw nearly as hard. His arsenal is not particularly impressive. Doesn't, on paper, look all that much better against left-handed batters than righties. BABIP, I guess, will be a little bit lower, but otherwise pretty even. But another guy who's on a minor league contract, so we could have him on the major league team at a pretty reasonable price if we decided he made the squad. I don't know that he will, but another left-handed arm that we can bring into camp, and at this point, beggars can't be choosers. So all in all, bringing on the two lefty relievers, a pretty uneventful Rule 5 draft for us in terms of adding players, and we actually had several players picked from us. We tend to like to have some of those 4A guys in our organization, and unfortunately we're going to have to use the free agent and trade market to try to replenish a bit this offseason, because we did certainly lose some organizational depth in the Rule 5, but it was all guys we decided not to protect. So I'd say no harm, no foul, but perhaps a little bit of harm by the fact that we don't have the same depth that we did a few hours ago. And we've just lost another player who the fans weren't happy about, but supposedly our fan interest hasn't retracted, so I guess that's slightly positive. Patrick Sandoval, who had a really nice year for us when we picked him up, I believe it was as a minor league free agent. Minor league free agent, and he had a year with a 3.35 ERA, 90 strikeouts, and 83 in the third innings as a lefty in our pen. Was a guy that we would have loved to bring back, but he ended up signing for $4.6 million with the Yankees, a little less than he told us he was looking for. But that still is a pretty hard figure for us to hit right now. And as we get ready to finish up this year and finish up this episode here on December 31st, 2029, yesterday we got a second scouting report back on Jorge Santana, who's probably the most interesting international free agent. So we now have very high scouting accuracy on him. Love his defensive ability, like his speed, love the power, like the eye. The issue is that his contact and his avoid strikeout ratings are about as bad as we thought they were when we first started looking at him, and he's still looking for $17 million a year. Certainly if that price comes down incredibly, he could be a international free agent that we sign for a third consecutive year, following Hidero Endo a couple years ago and Hideki Arakawa this past year. And both of those players had solid years for us in their first year with the team. Subsequently traded away Endo in the Colt Keith deal. And Arakawa will be playing his second year with us, most likely next season. But Santana is interesting, but nowhere near $17 million interesting to me, with the fact that his strikeout numbers could make Hidero Endo look like a disciplined hitter. And before we finish up the episode, we'll call on our worldwide scouting department for help if they're willing to give it to us between now and the next episode. Take a look at some of the international amateur free agents that are still out there. We do have as much as anybody to spend this year at $5.7 million. So we want to make this pick impactful, although it's likely 5, 6, 7, maybe even 8 years till whoever we pick will be impacting us in the majors, even if things go reasonably well. 4 pitchers that we have had in to camp most recently that we've gotten to know pretty well over these last few months. Jesus Pagon out of the Dominican. I think his stuff, his movement, and his control could all be above average. Could potentially have a 3-pitch arsenal. Only 16 years old, and he's already throwing in the mid-90s. So a lot to like about him, but with that 20 stuff and the 20 control, a lot of growth going to be required for him to really work out. David Pizarro, another 16-year-old starter. I think his stuff could be absolutely filthy, with above average movement and control as well. Potential 3 to 4 pitch arsenal. Reaching his stuff potential is going to be pretty dependent on reaching close to his ceiling in that changeup, which certainly is not guaranteed. Potentially outstanding stamina, good at holding on runners, love the ground ball tendencies with the defensive infield that we've built and we hope to continue building. Throws in the low to mid-90s, looking for $2.2 million. I think I lean to him over Pagan. Luis Vera, 16-year-old out of Mexico, another guy who looks like he could be well above average in everything, and if things go well, could have a 4 or 5 pitch arsenal. Also good stamina, pretty good at holding on runners, ground ball tendencies. Ice Water Vera is also interesting to me, although he's looking for more than Pizarro. And then Juan Portillo, starter out of Venezuela, final guy that we've been looking at. Fastball, not necessarily that impressive. Going to need to develop his sinker, splitter, and or cutter to really be effective. Doesn't throw quite as hard as the other guys, and a little younger. Doesn't have the same type of ceiling, and he's looking for more money than any of them, so probably the least likely one for me to go after. I tend to think if we go with a pitcher, Pizarro or Vera are probably the two that I'm leaning towards, but it's always useful for me to hear what others are thinking. And with the 4 pitchers that we've been bringing into training camps, I know that our crack team of scouts realizes that means that there's 6 position players that we've been bringing in, and interestingly, we still think that all 6 of them are 5-star prospects. First baseman Juan Archuleta is this year's version of the Bat with potentially 75 contact, 75 power. Doesn't really do anything else particularly well, but 75 contact and 75 power is enough to make him interesting to us. Kuorod is his only in OOTP nickname. Jesus Bueno, 17-year-old shortstop out of the Dominican. Love the high adaptability, work ethic, and intelligence. Not really a shortstop, probably a third baseman if had to play somewhere. Looks like he could be a pretty interesting bat. He's also durable in terms of his injury proneness, and the home run power is potentially exceptional. So a pretty interesting player. Could also even play corner outfield going forward. So some position versatility for a youngster with a really interesting bat and a nice personality. Another shortstop, Arturo Cabrera, 16-year-old out of the Dominican. Another guy who's durable with potentially incredible power. A little better defensively with that 60 range. High work ethic, low financial ambition, low intelligence, overall potential, 60 contact, 60 gap power, and 55 eye to go with that 85 power, as opposed to with Jesus Bueno, 60 contact, again, 55 gap power and 65 eye. So Bueno's gap power is a little less potentially, and his eye is potentially a little bit better. Bueno, however, is looking for $1.2 million a year more than Cabrera. Center fielder Esteban Cedillo, 17-year-old Dominican. He's a corner outfielder, does have high work ethic. Another guy with potentially really interesting power. I tend to think I'd probably go with one of the infielders over him, particularly with the fact that Cedillo's looking for $3 million. And actually, I think I messed up Bueno and Cabrera when I was talking about the money. Bueno's the guy looking for the big money, not Cabrera. The final 2 guys we've had in Waga Sawatu out of South Africa, second baseman. Another guy with high work ethic, not a ton of speed, decent defensively, but probably not really a second baseman or a shortstop, but another guy with potentially really good home run power. And last but not least, Arturo Uresti out of Venezuela. High adaptability, work ethic, and intelligence. Certainly looks like he could be a competent corner outfielder, could play left or right. Like the durability, and really love the fact that there's potentially 60 contact, 60 gap power to go with 80 power and 80 eye. Could be a pretty imposing home run and walk compiler if A. Young reaches his full potential. And you're Resty looking for $2.6 million. So there's definitely a few interesting guys here. If you've got thoughts on your favorites, always helpful for me to hear them. Some years I go big after one player that I'm really in love with. I don't know that I feel that way this year. I feel this might be a year to overbid with, say, 120, 125% of what two guys that I like a lot are looking for, and see if maybe rolling the dice allows us to bring on two players that we really like instead of one player that we love. Because I just don't know that there's a guy who jumps off to me as one who I'm just obsessed with compared to all the other guys who are available. But it's a first look in terms of the video series today, and the last look, unfortunately, for all of you before I actually make these decisions in the next episode. So if you've got thoughts on what we should do and what your recommendation would be, as I noted, always helpful for me to hear them. And with that, we will call it an episode. Going to have some interesting decisions to make over the rest of free agency, but international amateur free agency will be our big focus in just 15 days when that period gets underway in mid-January. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.